Good afternoon. So it's very exciting because last year when we were here, it was all about Bitcoin Treasury. This year, obviously the market has gone through a bit of a cycle correction, but we're still here talking about Bitcoin Treasury. But obviously things will be very different. So let's start. Okay, so my name is Jason. I'm the founder and managing partner at Sora Ventures. We've been investing in Bitcoin Treasury since kind of the early day. Metaplanet, we're one of the earliest investors with Amanda here in Metaplanet, and then we did Hong Kong, and then we did Thailand, we did South Korea, we did Taiwan. We have one on NASDAQ. So we've been in this space for some time. I'll let Amanda introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Amanda Fabiano. I'm COO of Na카모토. Na카모토 is a Bitcoin operating company with a Treasury foundation. So we own Bitcoin Inc., which is where we're all at today. We also own UTXO. Before being at Na카모토, I was in the mining space. So I had an advisory firm. I was the head of mining at Galaxy, and I was also the director of Bitcoin mining at Fidelity.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Lee. I'm the CEO of BitPlanet. I guess BitPlanet, I did a bunch of stuff. I will say I started at Lehman Brothers in 2007. So the timing was pretty impeccable there. If you're old enough to remember, guys carrying out boxes from Lehman office, I was one of them. After financial crisis, I became a lawyer. I practiced as a corporate lawyer for about 5 years. I was fortunate to represent Galaxy and Grayscale in their early days. I think that was around 2017. That's when I first, discovered Bitcoin, and I started my own fund as a solo GP. I worked on my own fund for about 4 years in the infrastructure, stablecoin and Bitcoin infrastructure space. And 2025, last year, exactly here in Vegas, I met Jason. I always had this aspiration of building a Bitcoin treasury company in Korea because I think Bitcoin is such an important asset, especially for Koreans, given their very unique macroeconomic and geopolitical setup. And that was just my dream. And I met with Jason. He had his vision across Asia, and we kind of hit it off right away. We found we are very aligned and looking at the same direction. And then we started BitPlanet last September, and it's been a fun ride. BitPlanet is a public company in Korea. We are listed on the Kosdaq market. We have about 150 employees. We are in the SI business, that is the system integration business. We have about $25 to $30 million of revenue per year. It's a cash flow positive business. It's a growing business because a lot of our clients are rebuilding their IT infrastructure in the face of AI. And and we have 300 Bitcoin. I can say, I think at this point pretty safely, we are the only Korean company that is growing our Bitcoin stack. I'll end here.
This is very interesting because we have two panelists here, one in the US, one in Asia. And the more important thing is, these two companies are continuously finding ways to grow the company, whether this is accumulating more Bitcoin, accumulating more cash flow. But obviously, we've been in a phase where things have changed quite a bit in our industry. Amanda and Paul, I want to get your perspective on the things that you guys care more today versus like last year. Things that you value today versus last year. What have you guys learned, and how do you guys define success moving forward?
So being a public company is a very different thing than being a private company, and the way that you are looked at and judged is totally different. We merged into a healthcare business, and when you look back at the financials of our company, it is the 12-month last year financials were a healthcare business. So when you go to value us and you try to look at our track record, it doesn't really reflect the company that we are today. So we are heads down and focused on working on the operating companies, having them be cash flow generating, to be able to, in a quarter, 2 quarters, be able to have our financials tell the story of Na카모토. Na카모to's has only been around for 7 months, believe it or not, and this transition to public company has been, at the same time of markets completely crashing. So I think it's going to take us a little bit for our story to be understood by the by the public. So I think, my thing is, consistency with what we're doing and having that be our focus. So that's, an operator perspective of where I think things are going. I also think that you'll start to see some of the other companies have a more of a focus on IR too, because like what differentiates you from someone else that's just holding Bitcoin on balance sheet?
Paul, what about you guys? Because you guys are in Asia, different environment, different regulation. What is valuable for you guys moving forward, and how did you guys kind of value yourself compared to what you've seen last year?
Yeah, I think I share a lot of things that Amanda just said. I guess my thesis is a strong Bitcoin treasury company is, at the end of the day, it is a strong company. Like you have to strive to be a strong company in a traditional sense. That means, do you have a growing revenue? Do you have a positive cash flow? Do you have a strong management team? What is your ROE? What is your ROA? You have to look at all these things. And just looking at Bitcoin that's siloed as just your balance sheet asset, and make that as your end-all story of your company does not work, unless you of course have 800,000 Bitcoin like strategy. It does not work, especially in places like Korea where financial engineering and financial regulations are much more rigid, and there's not a lot you can do in terms of financial engineering. For example, like trading at premium and issuing a lot of debt or issuing a lot of equity, buying a lot of Bitcoin and creating that flywheel does not work. So when I look at company, I think the same framework applies. Every company has an income statement and balance sheet, and both are very important. And on the balance sheet side, the treasury management, capital allocation is very important. On the income statement side, P&L, revenue, cash flow is both important. I think the hardest part, and I think the challenge that's lying ahead for all the Bitcoin treasury companies is building that, productive infrastructure, right? I think business is an infrastructure after all. Productive infrastructure that connects your Bitcoin treasury with your income story in a synergistic and seamless way.
What is interesting about this bear market, or we're kind of in a bear market right now, but what is interesting about this is that I feel like there's a lot more smart money out there. Meaning that, historically, if prices have gone through a correction, people kind of get really, like, they're trying to FUD and then they're trying to kind of exit, right? This bear market, I found it very interesting in the sense that a lot of our listed company went through a correction, and people are like coming and knocking on our doors and asking us, hey, can we invest with you guys? Or like, can we merge with you guys? Can we do something with you guys? I think that's the part that people don't understand, which is like, if you're in the public market, there's a lot of opportunities to do things even after correction. So, Amanda, I'm like, obviously you came from both sides, private and public. What is something that you find it very exciting that maybe from a outside perspective they don't really see, but from you guys who are operating it, that's something that keeps you guys excited every day?
So, in my opinion, bear markets are the best for building actual businesses. A bull market, there's a lot of things that are coming at you, and there's so much noise, but there's a lot of signal in a bear market. So I think my favorite thing is finding the people that have been building things and figuring out like how we can work with them or invest in them, or even like hire them, right? Or we're looking at M&A, we're looking at different companies, we're looking at our company, like what are the best products that we can build in the verticals that we already have. So it's sad when price is down, but I think there's a massive amount of opportunity, and I think you'll continue to see more people learn about it, and there's not a lot of tourists when price is down. I do agree with you that the institutional side of things has continued to grow. And we are we're not first or second cycle, right? Even in the last cycle, we had all of the miners go public, right? So a lot of the institutional capitals, banks, they had to learn a little bit more about Bitcoin because there was like 21 plus public miners, right? That went public in 2021 timeframe. Now, last year, you saw this wave of what was called digital asset treasury companies going public. So the initial group of people that were like, oh, I know a little bit of like analysts, et cetera, like thinking like from an IR perspective, they knew a little bit about Bitcoin because of like the miners. now you're seeing, some of those same analysts cover the digital asset treasury companies and more. So I think you'll continue to see adoption. Even yesterday we hosted Deal Day Nakamoto, which really shows the flywheel of all of the companies that we have, and we had, I think, something like 15 to 20 banks show up to talk to Bitcoin companies and learn about what they're building and try to see how they could service those companies. So I do think there is more, intersection of traditional finance and Bitcoin. I was on a panel yesterday with Gurpreet from Kraken, and he said that it's a little bit easier for Bitcoin companies like Kraken to learn traditional finance than it is for traditional finance to learn about Bitcoin. And I thought that was a really interesting take, and also really true, because the risk frameworks that traditional banks have doesn't allow them to move as quickly as it does for a Kraken of the world, right? So I think that will be an interesting thing to kind of keep an eye on, the Krakens of the world and what they're doing in the next cycle, and how that ends up being perceived by the public markets.
And speaking about institution adoption, I know Korea is very interesting too. Actually, for those who don't know, in the U.S. you can buy Bitcoin, and that sort of freedom is really a luxury in Asia. And in Asia, where a lot of these public companies are just trying to figure out how to onboard institutions. For example, in Korea, even though the Korean exchanges have one of the highest volumes in the world, institutions actually cannot trade, right? And it's very difficult for institutions to even buy Bitcoin, because the minute you ask for a wire to go out and you tell them, hey, we're buying digital asset, they're just gonna block it. So maybe you can learn a bit from Paul's perspective and how Korea specifically is different from other markets, and how this market have actually allowed a lot of institutions to kind of enter into Bitcoin through BitPlanet.
Yeah, so Korea is a very interesting market. There are definitely a lot of latent demands from institutions to have exposure to Bitcoin. And as Jason just mentioned, it is legally impossible for these institutions to open an account with crypto exchanges like Upbit or Bithumb. So there is a set of opportunities for us to be that channel, to be that access channel for these institutions to hold Bitcoin through us. But more broadly, Korea is, there are definitely a set of challenges and opportunities, operating a Bitcoin treasury company in Korea. I guess challenges, there are many, but to level set, the regulatory regime in Korea is very different from that of the US. It is a positive regulatory regime, which means unless something is explicitly stated in the law or regulation of the code, you cannot do it, which is the other way around in the US. I'm kind of overgeneralizing here. There is specifically in the Korean law that says, these six things are financial product, A, B, and C, and D, and E. And Bitcoin is obviously not one of them, right? And there's a pros and cons to that approach. The pros is that it always provides a very clear guidance on what you can do and what you cannot do. And obviously the bad side of it is whenever there's a new technology or the sort of innovation comes along, especially on the fintech side, it gets stifled. Like, people just cannot do it because it is not specifically stated in the regulation, and it takes forever for the legislative and the Congress to take action. And obviously, Bitcoin is in that gray area right now. So so that presents a lot of challenges for Bitcoin treasury companies, starting from just buying Bitcoin. Like, how are we going to handle it accounting-wise, tax-wise, public disclosure and filing? And from BitPlanet's side, we spent a lot of time building that sort of defensible infrastructure that spans all the way from internal governance to custody and public filing. So that's one of the challenges that we're trying to solve as we go. The opportunity is obviously, if we solve this, right, if we do this the right way, you are going to be the the category definer, right? You're going to be the only company that is going to be doing what you're doing. And Korea is 12th largest economy in the world. It has the 8th largest equity market in the world. And to be able to do that and to be able to do that alone is actually a huge advantage and personally means a lot to me as I work on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important because a lot of you guys don't know, but the evolution of how people hold and buy Bitcoin has changed quite a bit. In the early, 10 years ago, if you want to obtain Bitcoin, you got to mine Bitcoin. And then you had the crypto exchanges that allow people to buy Bitcoin, in the form of tokens. And then now people are going to be mostly buying Bitcoin through securities, in the form of securities, right? And I have a lot of friends who never bought Bitcoin before, and their first Bitcoin is through our shares, right? And so I think a lot of people are also asking is like if we're investing into Bitcoin, we're investing into Bitcoin Treasury. Maybe last year, I think the metric was the standard was what's the MNAV, right? Or how many Bitcoins you have. But as we kind of went through that huge correction, we realized, as investors too, it's not necessarily about how much capital you raise. It's more about the consistency you make throughout the year. Are you still buying Bitcoin on a monthly basis? Are you still able to buy Bitcoin on a monthly basis? So at least from our perspective, from our fund perspective, we care a lot about these things. But I know the US and the Asian market is different. And more importantly, I think, Amanda's company is in a position where they can do a lot more things because they did early, because they're in a position where they made it very clear that they can invest in other things. I think you mentioned about potential M&A. Are you able to share some of the things, kind of in your opinion, what are some new ways that people, or at least the audience here, what is the best way to evaluate the Bitcoin treasury companies in the U.S. today?
So we are an operating company with a treasury. So I think we're in a little bit of a different bucket than just a treasury. We obviously want to grow our Bitcoin stack because we believe in Bitcoin, but we also have these operating businesses. And the questions that we ask ourselves are, do we think that our investment in the operating businesses is going to outperform Bitcoin? And you have to think about that in a different time horizon. So if you're doing an M&A, for example, your time horizon is going to be much longer. You have to integrate the business, you have to then make it work, you have to grow it, right? Whereas you can just buy Bitcoin and hold it, and you have your idea of where you think Bitcoin is going to go. We, from the beginning, took an approach that we were going to have operating businesses. So I think from our perspective, things like MNAV, Bitcoin per share, I don't know if it's the perfect metric for us. And I think this also, not to tie back to mining, but when miners first came out, there were 35 different metrics. Cost to mine a Bitcoin, if you look back, they all did it differently. There was electricity cost, there was ASIC cost, there was removing all SG&A cost. I think we're kind of in that same phase right now where it's how do you figure out which one of these companies is good? And I think everyone kind of defaulted on MNAV and Bitcoin per share. But that doesn't really work across the board as these companies grow into different things. So if you have operating companies within a Bitcoin company, you should be judging them as an operating business, which is a very traditional metric. And when we think about institutional growth and institutional adoption in banks and investment banks, they are going to look at you in a lens that they look at every other business. So I think we sometimes in Bitcoin, we try to get cute with metrics, and it's if it's just an operating business and it has a treasury, let's just use metrics that everyone else knows about, especially as we're trying to gain more institutional adoption.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that I actually prefer that as well.
I just want to add, 100% agree with what Amanda said on the metrics. One thing, if you're considering investing in Bitcoin treasury companies, especially outside the U.S., that's where I am, you have to look at the management. And I cannot stress that enough. Management's reputation and management track record, because there are a lot of small cap companies that are just trying to chase this hot thing, and whenever we have a bear market like this, they're just moving on to the next, and they're not doing what they have promised to do. So I think when you want to invest in a Bitcoin treasury company, look at their management. And don't look at how many followers they have on X. Don't look at if they appeared on TV or something, but you have to see if they are consistent over the past so many years on what they said about Bitcoin if they're willing to kind of follow through on what they promise to do long term. And of course, you have to look at the investors of the company as well, if they're supportive of their long-term vision.
Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Amanda. And then thanks for coming. Yeah, thanks.
Every year, this community comes together to celebrate, to debate, to build what comes next. And every year, the stage gets bigger. Sound money, center stage. So, where do you go to celebrate the next chapter in Bitcoin history? You come home. Nashville, July 2027.